The rise of Wu Zetian, from concubine to emperor. The winter wind howled through Chang'an's vermilion gates on that December morning in 690 CE, but it wasn't the bitter cold that sent shivers through the assembled crowd. Before them stood a woman of 67, her face carved by decades of ruthless ambition, about to shatter 2 millennia of ironclad tradition. Wu Zetian, former concubine, Empress, regent, and soon-to-be Emperor of China, stepped forward to seize what no woman had dared grasp before: absolute power over the Middle Kingdom. The old guard trembled, but they dared not speak. Those who had opposed WU's rise had a habit of disappearing, their families erased from memory. Yet this was no mere tale of brutality. Wu Zetian would prove herself one of China's most capable rulers, transforming a dynasty through cunning, reform, and an unflinching will to power that would make Machiavelli blush. The ambitious rise of Wu Zhao. Her father called her the perfect child, a compliment that had nothing to do with obedience. By 13, Wu Zhao could recite complex poetry from memory, debate historical precedent with scholars twice her age, and had mastered the delicate art of calligraphy. But it was her penetrating intelligence that set her apart. While other noble girls practiced demure smiles and proper tea service, young Wu devoured military treatises and political histories, studying the rise and fall of dynasties with the intensity of a general planning campaigns. The imperial court didn't know what to make of her when she arrived at 14. Most concubines entered Emperor Taizong's service with painted faces and carefully rehearsed charms. Wu brought only her wit and a burning ambition that the aging emperor found irresistible. While others competed for his physical attention, she engaged him in discussions of poetry and governance, positioning herself not as a mere plaything, but as an intellectual companion. The lessons came quickly in the poisonous atmosphere of the inner court. Wu learned to read faces better than books, to hear the deadly whispers behind palace fans, to recognize the difference between true allies and convenient friends. She watched as rival concubines destroyed each other through clumsy schemes, studying their failures with clinical precision. When she smiled and bowed to senior concubines, her gestures were perfect, but her eyes were always calculating, measuring, learning. Taizong's other consorts dismissed her as the emperor's pet scholar. They didn't notice how she cultivated relationships with eunuchs and servants, building a web of loyal informants throughout the palace. They missed how she positioned herself to catch the lingering gazes of Crown Prince Gaozong during state ceremonies. And most critically, they failed to recognize that her greatest weapon wasn't seduction or manipulation, it was patience. When Emperor Taizong died in 649, tradition demanded that his concubines spend the rest of their lives as Buddhist nuns, forever cloistered from power and politics. Wu entered the monastery at Ganye Temple with the same perfect smile she'd worn at court. But behind temple walls, she wasn't praying for enlightenment, she was plotting her return. The crown prince had not forgotten the fascinating young concubine who had caught his eye. And Wu Zhao was about to teach the world that a woman's ambition could not be contained by monastery walls. The rise of Wu, from nun to empress. The monks at Ganye Temple later swore they never saw it happen, how a supposedly celibate Buddhist nun managed to exchange secret messages with the new Emperor Gaozong. Yet somehow, barely a year into her religious seclusion, Wu emerged from her humble cell to become the emperor's most favored concubine. The whispers began immediately. It was sacrilege, it was immoral, it violated every principle of filial piety. After all, she had served Gaozong's father. But Wu understood something her critics didn't. In the game of imperial power, scandal was preferable to insignificance. Empress Wang initially treated Wu as an ally, even promoting her position within the court. It was a fatal miscalculation. While Wang focused on maintaining her ceremonial dignity, Wu was systematically charming the emperor's closest advisors, learning state secrets, and positioning herself as Gaozong's most trusted confidant. By day, she played the role of the demure consort. By night, she was drafting policy proposals and memoranda that mysteriously found their way into the emperor's hands. The fall of Empress Wang became a masterclass in political assassination that would be studied for centuries. First came the whispers of infidelity, carefully planted among the palace servants. Then the suspicious deaths of Wang's supporters, each death appearing accidental or natural. When Wang's infant daughter died mysteriously, Wu publicly accused the Empress of infanticide, a charge so shocking that it paralyzed the court. Evidence emerged suggesting Wang had practiced witchcraft against the emperor. Each revelation was perfectly timed, each accusation more devastating than the last, until Wang's position became untenable. Gaozong was not a weak emperor, but he was a man susceptible to influence. As Wang's reputation crumbled, Wu positioned herself as the voice of stability and wisdom. Her suggestions for managing state affairs proved remarkably effective. Her political insights seemed almost prophetic. When she finally accused Wang of attempting to poison the emperor himself, the court was prepared to believe anything. Wang was deposed, imprisoned, and executed, though some whispered that Wu herself had ordered palace guards to drown the former empress in a wine vat. Within days of Wang's death, Wu was elevated to the position of empress. The court officials who had once sneered at the common concubine now kowtowed before her throne. But Wu's expression remained unchanged. That same perfect smile she had worn since her days as a teenage consort. She had learned during her first stay in the palace that power wasn't about wearing the crown. It was about controlling the hand that wore it. As Gaozong's health began to mysteriously decline, that lesson was about to become clear to everyone. Wu Zetian, the power behind the throne. The physicians called it vertigo, a mysterious affliction that left Emperor Gaozong unable to read court documents or focus on matters of state for more than a few minutes at a time. How convenient that his devoted wife offered to shoulder these burdens, to review petitions and issue edicts in his name. Even more convenient that anyone who questioned the Empress's growing authority seemed to develop mysterious ailments of their own. Wu's transition from empress to de facto ruler was a masterpiece of political theater. In public, she played the role of the dutiful wife, constantly deferring to her ailing husband's wisdom. In private, she was building an intelligence network that would have made Rome's secret police envious. Her agents infiltrated every level of society, from peasant villages to aristocratic households. Buddhist temples became listening posts, merchant caravans carried coded messages, and even the emperor's own relatives found themselves under constant surveillance. The Palace of Gathered Wisdom became her true seat of power, a shadowy bureau that processed intelligence from across the empire. Officials who opposed her policies would find their corrupt dealings mysteriously exposed. Generals plotting rebellion would discover their conspiracies revealed before they could act. When the powerful Xu family began organizing opposition to her regency, 3 generations of Shu men died in separate accidents within a month. But Wu was more than just a master of espionage. She revolutionized China's civil service examination system, smashing the aristocrats' monopoly on power by opening government positions to talented commoners. Farmers found their tax burdens lightened, corrupt officials were ruthlessly purged, and military victories expanded the empire's borders. The same officials who had once mocked her common birth now watched in horror as she systematically dismantled their privileges while making China stronger. Her methods for dealing with rivals became legendary. Those who opposed her mildly might only be exiled to distant provinces. Her most dangerous enemies faced death by 1,000 cuts or were forced to commit suicide. The lucky ones simply disappeared into the night, never to be seen again. When her own nephew dared to criticize her influence over the Emperor, she had him publicly executed as a warning to others. The message was clear: cross Wu Zetian, and not even family ties would save you. By 675, the pretense of Gaozong's rule had become almost comical. The emperor could barely stand without assistance, yet officials maintained the fiction that he was directing policy. Everyone knew where true power resided, in the hands of the woman whose intelligence networks knew their secrets, whose reforms had won the people's support, and whose enemies had a habit of meeting unfortunate ends. Wu had become China's shadow emperor, but even this was not enough to satisfy her ambition. She was about to demonstrate that the Dragon Throne itself was within a woman's grasp. Empress Wu, power, intrigue, and transformation. Her own infant daughter's death haunted the palace like a restless ghost. The official story, that Empress Wang had murdered the child, had served its purpose in Wang's downfall. But darker whispers persisted, that Wu herself had sacrificed her baby, strangling the infant in a calculated move to frame her rival. The truth died with Wang, but the incident cast a shadow over Wu's relationship with her surviving children that would shape the future of China. She raised her sons like pieces on a chessboard, each one positioned for a specific purpose in her grand design. Crown Prince Hong she kept weak and dependent, allowing him just enough authority to maintain the appearance of a proper succession while ensuring he remained utterly reliant on her guidance. Her second son, Xian, she cultivated as a threat, a constant reminder to Hong that he could be replaced. The younger princes she dispatched to distant provinces, where they could neither threaten nor be threatened by court politics. Buddhism became her weapon of choice in consolidating spiritual authority. She commissioned the carving of the Longmen Grottos, massive Buddha statues whose faces mysteriously resembled her own. Monks who supported her received lavish donations. Those who opposed her found their monasteries investigated for corruption. She even dared to proclaim herself Maitreya, the future Buddha, a claim that would have been blasphemous if anyone had dared to say so publicly. The brutal efficiency of her intelligence network reached new heights. Her secret police, led by the ruthless Zhou Xing and Lai Junshin, developed innovative methods of interrogation that could extract confessions from even the most stubborn opponents. Those accused of plotting against her faced the 9 familial exterminations, death not just for themselves, but for their entire extended family. When the powerful Pei clan began questioning her authority, 27 members of their family vanished in a single night. Yet even as blood flowed in the palace dungeons, Wu was transforming China's government. She established the Court of Diplomatic Reception, staffed entirely by women, to handle foreign affairs. Her reforms of the military examination system produced generals loyal to the throne rather than their aristocratic families. She created China's first system of agricultural loans, preventing peasants from falling into debt slavery to local landlords. Each reform weakened her opponents while strengthening her own position. As Emperor Gaozong's health entered its final decline, Wu's preparations accelerated. She positioned loyal generals in key commands, placed her supporters in vital administrative posts, and methodically eliminated anyone who might oppose her next move. When Gaozong finally died in 683, the court expected Crown Prince Hong to assume the throne. But Wu had spent decades preparing for this moment, and she wasn't about to let mere traditions stand in her way. The stage was set for the most audacious power grab in Chinese history. Wu Zetian, the rise of the Zhou Dynasty. The announcement came like a thunderbolt in 690 CE. China's 1,500-year-old empire would be reborn as the Zhou Dynasty, with Wu Zetian as its first and only female emperor. Not Empress, Emperor. She took the title Sacred and Divine Emperor, ordered the creation of a new Chinese character for Emperor that combined the symbols for woman and ruler, and dared anyone to challenge her right to rule. Few did. Those who had opposed her regency were already dead or exiled, their families reduced to begging in the streets. Her coronation defied every tradition of Chinese civilization. She entered the throne room wearing the yellow robes reserved for male emperors, accepted the imperial seals as ancient kings had done, and performed sacred rites that no woman had ever dared attempt. When the moment came to ascend the dragon throne, witnesses reported that even the most hardened court officials trembled. This wasn't just a change of ruler, it was an earthquake that shook the very foundations of Chinese society. The new emperor's first acts were stunning in their boldness. She ordered the creation of grandmother-granddaughter ancestor tablets, placing women on equal footing with men in ancestral worship. She commissioned scholars to write biographies of famous women, creating a new historical canon that celebrated female achievement. When conservatives protested, she simply added their names to her ever-growing list of enemies. Her secret police grew so efficient that merely appearing on their lists was considered a death sentence. Yet her reign marked a golden age of Chinese innovation. She established the empire's first standard copper coinage, revolutionized the transportation system with a network of post stations, and created a diplomatic corps that extended Chinese influence from Korea to Persia. Her military campaigns pushed the empire's borders further than ever before. She ordered the compilation of massive encyclopedias, sponsored poets and artists, and turned Chang'an into the most cosmopolitan city on earth. The aristocracy watched in horror as she systematically destroyed their privileges. Her reformed examination system elevated farmers' sons to high office, while noble families found themselves shut out of power. She created new noble titles that could be earned through merit rather than birth, established schools for commoners, and instituted a system of anonymous reporting that allowed anyone to expose corruption among local officials. When the powerful Kui family protested these changes, she had their ancestral temples demolished and their lands redistributed to peasant farmers. At the height of her power, Wu created something unprecedented, a Chinese state run on talent rather than bloodline. Her ministers included former shop owners, scholars from humble backgrounds, and even a few women. She established the empire's first professional diplomatic corps, created a standardized system of weights and measures, and instituted regular agricultural inspections to prevent local famines. Every reform was calculated to centralize power in her hands while winning popular support. The Dragon Throne had never seemed more secure, but Wu was about to discover that even emperors face the one enemy that cannot be defeated: time itself. The Iron Empress, WU's unprecedented reign. War drums echoed across the Gobi Desert as WWU's armies marched north against the Gok Turks in 694. At home, her opponents had whispered that a woman couldn't lead armies, so she crushed the nomadic confederation with such overwhelming force that they remained subdued for generations. The victory parade through Chang'an featured captured Turkic princes in chains and wagons piled high with plunder. Even her harshest critics couldn't deny that China had never been more powerful or prosperous. Kashmir, Korea, and Vietnam sent ambassadors bearing tribute, marveling at the woman who had reshaped the natural order. Her diplomatic corps negotiated complex alliances that transformed China's neighbors into vassals without firing a single arrow. When the King of Silla wrote addressing her as Emperor, it marked the first time a Korean monarch had acknowledged a woman as his superior. The Japanese court, traditionally hostile to Chinese influence, began adopting her governmental reforms. Inside China, she ruled with a combination of terror and brilliance that left her subjects both fearful and grateful. Her secret police could make entire families disappear overnight, yet her agricultural reforms prevented famines that would have killed millions. She ordered the construction of massive granaries across the empire, created China's first state-supported medical system, and established a network of schools that gave commoners unprecedented opportunities for advancement. The 9-bell system she installed in every major city became a symbol of her justice and her ruthlessness. Anyone could ring the bells to appeal directly to the throne, bypassing corrupt local officials. But false accusations were punished by death, and even true ones could bring retribution from powerful families. The bells rang constantly despite the risk, testament to her subjects' desperate faith in her justice. When the powerful Liu clan attempted to silence accusers through intimidation, she had their entire household executed and their property distributed among their victims. Literature flourished under her patronage, but with a distinctly political edge. She commissioned vast historical works that emphasized the role of strong central authority in Chinese history. Poets who praised her reign were richly rewarded. Those who criticized it vanished into her prisons. She ordered the creation of new dictionaries and encyclopedias, standardizing the Chinese language itself to strengthen imperial control. Even Buddhism was reshaped. She sponsored the creation of giant stone sutras that would outlast any attempt to erase her legacy. But her greatest achievement was transforming China's rigid hierarchy into a genuine meritocracy. Under her reign, a farmer's son could become prime minister if he showed sufficient talent. She created special examinations for military officers, ensuring that armies were led by competent commanders rather than noble buffoons. When assembled in her throne room, her ministers looked nothing like the aristocratic courts of previous dynasties. They were former merchants, scholars from humble backgrounds, and career bureaucrats who owed everything to her patronage. As she entered her 8th decade, Wu faced a final challenge: securing her legacy. Her sons had proven disappointing, her closest advisors were aging, and new threats were emerging from unexpected quarters. The woman who had clawed her way from concubine to emperor was about to fight her last and most critical battle, not for power, but for the future she had sacrificed everything to build. Legacy of Wu Zetian, the female emperor. In her final years, WU's iron grip began to rust. The shadows under her eyes grew darker, her legendary memory began to falter, and her fearsome temper flared at imagined slights. The brothers Zhang and Zhang Yi, handsome young men she had elevated from obscurity to become her closest companions, exploited her weakness. They whispered poison about her most loyal ministers, turned her paranoia against proven allies, and nearly succeeded in destroying the meritocracy she had spent decades building. But Wu had one last display of her old ruthlessness left. When she finally recognized their manipulation in 705, she had them both executed with their entire households. It was her final act of political bloodshed. Death came for the Dragon Empress in December 705, not on the battlefield or by assassination, but in her bed at the Palace of Eternal Peace. She was 81, having ruled China longer than all but a handful of emperors. As her grip on power loosened in those final months, her son Zhongzong reclaimed the throne she had denied him decades earlier. The court quickly moved to erase her memory. Her Zhou dynasty was abolished, her reforms were rolled back, and her name was nearly scratched from history. But Wu had carved her legacy too deep to be erased. The examination system she perfected would survive for another 1,000 years, shaping Chinese society until the 20th century. Her military reforms created the model for imperial armies that would extend Chinese power across Asia. The bureaucratic state she built, run by talented administrators rather than nobility, became the standard for good governance. Even her enemies had to admit that China had never been larger, richer, or more powerful than under her rule. Her tomb stands empty now. Even her final resting place defied tradition. She ordered her burial marker left blank, declaring that her deeds should speak for themselves. Centuries of historians would struggle to define her legacy: brutal usurper or enlightened ruler, power-mad tyrant or revolutionary reformer. But perhaps Wu herself had already written the most fitting epitaph. In a poem composed near the end of her life, she wrote, "Asterisk, through all the years of storm and strife, I alone saw clearly what must be done. Let others judge me as they will. History knows I wore the dragon's crown, and made it mine by right of strength alone." Today, Wu Zetian stands as a singular figure in Chinese history, the woman who proved that the Son of Heaven could be a daughter. Her reign marked both the peak of Tang Dynasty power and a revolutionary moment when all the old certainties about gender and authority were shattered. She left China transformed, her institutions too effective to abandon, her example too powerful to forget. In the end, her greatest victory may have been this: she showed that the unthinkable was possible. The dragon throne, once seized, could never again be seen as the exclusive property of men.